The thunderous crack of gunfire echoed across the dusty plains as Abram Quinn clutched his bleeding chest and urged his horse forward, determined to outrun both death and the bandits trailing him. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining his weathered leather vest as he rode harder than he'd ever ridden before. His eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of Delta, Colorado, a town he'd never planned to visit, but now represented his only hope for survival. Katherine Anderson wiped her hands on her apron and surveyed the small medical clinic she'd established in Delta 3 years prior. The year was 1879, and as one of the few female doctors in the Colorado Territory, she'd faced her share of prejudice and distrust. Yet the small frontier town had gradually come to respect her skills, born from formal training back east and sharpened by the harsh realities of life on the frontier. "Dr. Anderson?" a voice called from outside, followed by the sound of pounding boots on her porch. "Rider coming in, looks badly wounded." Katherine grabbed her medical bag, already calculating what supplies she might need. This was routine in Delta: injured miners, cowboys caught in scrapes, children with fevers. What wasn't routine was the man they carried in minutes later, dust-covered and ashen-faced, blood spreading across his chest in an ominous stain. "Bullet wound, close to the heart from the looks of it," said Sheriff Wilson, helping to lay the stranger on her examination table. "Found him nearly fallen off his horse at the edge of town." Katherine moved quickly, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt to reveal a muscular chest with a small, ominous hole just inches from where his heart would be. The man's eyes fluttered open, startling blue against his sun-bronzed face. "Don't," he rasped, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't waste medicine, I'm not worth it." Katherine met his gaze steadily, noting the pain, the resignation, and something else, a fieriness that suggested this man wasn't accustomed to giving up. "I'll decide that," she replied firmly, freeing her wrist from his grasp. "Now lie still unless you want me to strap you down." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips before unconsciousness claimed him again. Sheriff Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Know anything about him?" "Nothing yet," Katherine said, already preparing her instruments. "But I intend to keep him alive long enough to find out." The bullet had missed his heart by less than an inch, lodging dangerously close to vital blood vessels. Removing it would risk massive bleeding, but leaving it might lead to infection and slow poisoning. Katherine worked through the night, first stabilizing him, then carefully extracting fragments of the bullet, leaving the largest piece embedded where removing it would likely kill him instantly. Dawn was breaking when she finally washed the blood from her hands and checked his pulse again. Steady if weak, the stranger would live, at least for now. "You're a stubborn one," she murmured, brushing a lock of sandy hair from his forehead. "What trouble have you brought to our doorstep?" 3 days passed before Abram Quinn fully regained consciousness. Katherine had been changing his bandages when those blue eyes suddenly focused on her face. "You didn't listen," he said, voice hoarse from disuse. "I rarely do when someone tells me not to do my job," she replied, helping him take a sip of water. "I'm Dr. Katherine Anderson, and you are Abram Quinn." He winced as he tried to shift position. How bad? Katherine's expression remained professional. "Bad enough." "The bullet's still in there, too close to your heart to risk removing completely. You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Quinn." "Not luck, you." His eyes held hers for a moment, then darted around the small room. "Where's my gun belt?" "Locked away, along with whatever trouble followed you here." Katherine checked his bandages. "Sheriff Wilson has some questions for you when you're stronger." Abram's jaw tightened. "I don't aim to bring trouble to your town, Doctor. Yet here you are, with a bullet near your heart and likely men who put it there not far behind." She placed a cool hand on his forehead, checking for fever. "Rest now. Arguments can wait until you're stronger." Over the next week, Katherine found herself increasingly intrigued by her mysterious patient. Abram Quinn was unfailingly polite, surprisingly educated for a cowboy, and frustratingly tight-lipped about his circumstances. What she did learn came in fragments. He'd been riding with a cattle drive from Texas, had no family waiting for him, and possessed skills with firearms that suggested experience beyond simple ranch work. The sheriff's inquiries had turned up little. No wanted posters matched Quinn's description, but that didn't mean much in territories where law was still catching up to crime. "Your wound is healing well," Katherine told him as she changed his bandages 10 days after his arrival. She'd moved him to a small room behind her clinic, away from the prying eyes of the town. "Though that bullet will remain your constant companion." "Had worse companions," he replied with a half-smile that transformed his face, softening the hard lines around his eyes. "How long until I can ride?" Katherine frowned. "Eager to leave our hospitality, Mr. Quinn, eager not to wear it out." He caught her hand as she finished securing the bandage. "And eager not to put good people at risk." The touch sent an unexpected warmth through her fingers, and Katherine withdrew her hand perhaps too quickly. "You're still at risk of infection and hemorrhage. Riding now would be foolish." "Staying might be more foolish," he countered, but didn't press further. That evening, Katherine found herself discussing her patient with Eliza Harris, the widow who ran the town's only hotel and one of Katherine's few close friends in Delta. "A handsome, wounded stranger with secrets," Eliza said, eyes twinkling as she poured tea. "Why, it's like something from a dime novel." Katherine rolled her eyes. "He's a patient, nothing more." "I've seen how you look at him when you think no one notices," Eliza replied, "and I've seen how he watches you move around that clinic of yours." "He's watching for a chance to escape my medical tyranny," Katherine said dryly, but felt a flush creeping up her neck. "Well, wounded bird or dangerous hawk, you'd best be careful." Eliza's expression grew serious. "2 men rode into town yesterday, asking questions about a lone rider who might have come through. Described your Mr. Quinn almost perfectly." Katherine's cup froze halfway to her lips. "What did they want?" "Didn't say, but they weren't the type you invite to Sunday supper." "Sheriff sent them on their way, told them no such man had passed through." Back at her clinic, Katherine found Abram attempting to stand, one hand braced against the wall, his face pale with the effort. "What are you doing?" she demanded, rushing to his side. "Testing my limits," he replied, teeth gritted. "By reopening your wound and collapsing on my floor." She slipped her shoulder under his arm, supporting his weight. "Sit before you fall." He allowed her to help him back to bed, his breathing labored. "2 men came to town looking for me, didn't they?" Katherine stilled. "How did you know?" "Small towns have big ears," he said grimly. "I need to leave, Katherine." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her pause. "You'll die if you try to ride now, and others might die if I stay." His eyes met hers, the blue darkened with pain and determination. "The bullet in my chest, it wasn't random. The men who shot me won't stop until the job's finished." "Who are they? Why are they hunting you?" Abram hesitated. "I used to ride with a gang out of Texas. Not by choice, initially was barely 18 when they found me half-starved on my dead parents' farm. For 8 years, I did things I'm not proud of." His voice grew tight. "When I finally worked up the courage to leave, the gang leader, Silas Blackwood, didn't take kindly to it." "So these men are part of your former gang?" Abram nodded. "Scouts, likely. If they find me here, Silas will bring more men. Your town doesn't want that kind of trouble." Katherine crossed her arms. "And what happens if you leave? You ride until you collapse, and they find you dying somewhere in the wilderness. Better than bringing death to your doorstep." He reached for her hand. "You've already done more than I deserve, Katherine." "You underestimate Delta," she replied, squeezing his fingers briefly before releasing them. "And you underestimate me." That night, Katherine made a decision. The next morning, she approached Sheriff Wilson with what Abram had told her. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran of the Union Army with a pragmatic view of frontier justice, listened without interruption. "Man's got a point," he said finally. "Delta's peaceful. We've got 40 able men at most, and half of those are miners who'd run at the first sign of serious trouble." "So we just send him out to die?" Katherine demanded. Sheriff Wilson sighed. "No, but we need to be smart about this." He scratched his gray-streaked beard. "Those scouts will be back, with or without reinforcements. We need time for your patient to heal, and time for me to get word to the territorial marshal in Denver." A plan began to take shape. They would move Abram to the abandoned Miller cabin outside town, where Katherine could continue to treat him away from prying eyes. Meanwhile, the sheriff would spread word that the wounded stranger had continued north toward Wyoming, a false trail for the scouts to follow. Abram protested, of course. "I won't put you at risk," he told Katherine as she helped him into the wagon that would transport him to the cabin under cover of darkness. "You're not putting me anywhere," she replied. "I'm making my own choices as I always have." The cabin was small but solid, hidden in a stand of cottonwoods with a creek nearby. Sheriff Wilson had stocked it with provisions, and Katherine arranged her medical supplies while two trusted deputies settled Abram inside. "I'll check on you daily," she told him as the deputies prepared to leave. "The sheriff or Deputy Collins will bring supplies every few days." Abram looked around the cabin, then back at her. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Katherine considered her answer carefully. "Because I believe people deserve second chances. Even former outlaws with bullets near their hearts." The next 3 weeks established a routine. Katherine would visit the cabin each morning, checking Abram's wound, changing bandages, and gradually helping him rebuild his strength. Their conversations grew less guarded, more personal. She told him about her training at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, her decision to come west after her fiancé died of tuberculosis, the challenges of establishing her practice in Delta. In turn, Abram shared more about his childhood on a small Texas farm, the drought that killed his crops and parents, the years riding with Silas Blackwood's gang, initially as a reluctant recruit, then as a trusted lieutenant who finally couldn't stomach the violence anymore. "I didn't just leave," he confessed one evening as they shared a simple meal of rabbit stew. "I took something that didn't belong to me." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "Money, information. Blackwood had been planning something big, a train robbery near Santa Fe. I sent anonymous warnings to the railroad and territorial authorities." He stared into his bowl. "The gang lost 3 men in the failed attempt. Blackwood figured out it was me who tipped them off, so it's revenge he wants." Abram's smile was grim. "Blackwood doesn't consider himself a cruel man, just a practical one. Betrayal has only one punishment in his code." As days passed, Katherine found herself lingering at the cabin longer than strictly necessary for medical purposes. She told herself it was concern for his recovery, but in quiet moments, she acknowledged the truth: she was drawn to this complicated man with gentle hands and haunted eyes. For his part, Abram seemed equally reluctant to see her leave each day. His strength returned gradually. Soon he was chopping wood for the cabin's stove and taking short walks along the creek. Katherine caught him watching her often, his expression unreadable. "You should be practicing your shooting," she told him one afternoon as she checked his wound. The entry point had healed well, though he still experienced occasional sharp pains when he moved too suddenly. "Don't have a gun," he reminded her. "The sheriff had kept his weapons locked away in town. You do now." She reached into her medical bag and pulled out a Colt revolver. "Sheriff Wilson thought you should have some protection out here." Abram took the gun, checking it with practiced ease. "You trust me with this, should I not?" she countered. He studied her face. "Most people would think twice before arming a former outlaw. I'm not most people." She closed her bag. "And I don't believe you're that man anymore." That evening, as Katherine prepared to return to town, a sudden spring storm blew in from the mountains. Rain lashed against the cabin windows and thunder rolled across the valley. "You can't ride back in this," Abram said, concern evident in his voice. "The creek could flood." Katherine knew he was right. The trail to town crossed the creek twice, and spring storms could turn the placid waterway into a raging torrent within hours. "I suppose I'll have to impose on your hospitality," she said, trying to sound professional despite the flutter in her stomach at the prospect of spending the night in the small cabin with him. As darkness fell, the cabin grew chilly. Abram built up the fire while Katherine inventoried their supplies. There was plenty of food, but the sleeping arrangements presented a challenge. The cabin had only one bed. "Take the bed," Abram said, unrolling a blanket on the floor near the stove. "I've slept on worse." "Your wound," she began to protest, "is healing fine." He gave her a look that brooked no argument. "I'm not putting a lady on the floor while I take the bed." Katherine wanted to point out that she'd slept in far worse conditions during her medical training, but recognized the pride beneath his insistence. Very well, thank you. Later, lying in the darkness, listening to the rain and Abram's steady breathing from across the room, Katherine found herself unable to sleep. The cabin felt smaller somehow, more intimate than during daylight hours. "Katherine," his voice came softly through the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes," she admitted, a pause. "Tell me something about yourself that nobody in Delta knows." The unexpected request made her smile in the darkness. "Why, just curious about the woman behind the doctor." Katherine thought for a moment. "I can't whistle. My brother tried to teach me for years, but I never managed it. He said I was the only person he knew who could be so precise with a scalpel but couldn't pucker my lips properly for a simple whistle." Abram's chuckle was warm in the darkness. "That's hardly a scandalous secret." "Your turn," she countered. Silence stretched for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, he spoke. "I write poetry, bad poetry probably, but I've filled 3 journals over the years." Katherine propped herself up on one elbow, wishing she could see his face. "Poetry. What kind?" "About things I've seen, people I've met, the land." His voice grew softer. "Lately, about a doctor with steady hands and eyes that see too much." Her heart quickened. "I'd like to hear some of it someday." "Maybe," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "If you promise not to laugh." The storm passed by morning, but something had shifted between them. Their conversations flowed more easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and occasional touches that lingered longer than necessary. When Katherine reluctantly returned to town, the clinic felt emptier than it had before. The relative peace was shattered 3 days later when Sheriff Wilson rode to the clinic at dawn, his expression grave. "They're back," he said without preamble. 4 men this time, including one who matches the description of this Blackwood fellow. They're staying at the saloon, asking questions all over town. Katherine's blood ran cold. Do they suspect? Hard to say. They know someone was treated for a gunshot wound. Claimed their friends coming to check on him. The sheriff adjusted his gun belt. "I've got deputies watching them, but they haven't done anything to justify running them out of town yet." "I need to warn Abram," Katherine said, already gathering supplies. "Be careful," the sheriff warned. "I can't spare men to follow you, might tip them off." Katherine took extra precautions, leaving town by the south road before circling back toward the cabin through little-used hunting trails. The spring morning was deceptively beautiful, wildflowers dotting the meadows and birds calling from the cottonwoods. She found herself rehearsing what she would say, how she would convince Abram it was time to move on, perhaps to Denver, where he could lose himself in the growing city until the territorial marshal dealt with Blackwood. The sight of smoke rising from the cabin chimney brought a smile to her face despite her worries. She'd grown accustomed to seeing him each day, to the quiet domesticity they'd established. "Abram," she called, dismounting near the cabin door. "It's Katherine." No response came from within. Frowning, she tied her horse and approached cautiously, one hand reaching for the small derringer she'd taken to carrying in her pocket. The cabin door stood slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open. The interior was in disarray, the small table overturned, Abram's bedding scattered. Signs of a struggle were evident, but no blood, she noted with clinical detachment that barely masked her rising panic. "Looking for your outlaw," the voice from behind made her spin around. A man stood in the doorway, tall and lean, with silver threading his dark hair and a scar bisecting one eyebrow. He wore fine clothes despite the dust of travel, and the gun on his hip looked well used. "Mr. Blackwood, I presume," Katherine said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. He smiled, a gesture that never reached his cold eyes. "My reputation precedes me, and you would be the doctor who saved Quinn's miserable life." He stepped into the cabin, glancing around with detached interest. "A waste of good medicine, if you ask me. Where is he?" Katherine demanded, her hand still in her pocket, fingers wrapped around the derringer. "Enjoying a reunion with old friends," Blackwood replied. "We have unfinished business, Quinn and I, nothing that need concern you, doctor. It concerns me when you kidnap my patient." Blackwood's laugh was without humor. "Patient, is that what they're calling it these days?" He moved closer, studying her face. You know what he is, what he's done, yet here you are, risking everything for him. Katherine met his gaze unflinchingly. I know he's a man trying to start over. Something I'd think you'd understand, given your own past. His eyes narrowed. You know nothing about me. I know men like you so convinced of your own righteousness that you can't see what you've become. She took a calculated risk. Abram told me everything, about Texas, about the gang. About how a man who once had principles now hunts down those who try to leave his control. Something dangerous flickered in Blackwood's expression. Quinn always did talk too much. Another fault I intend to correct permanently. The sheriff knows you're here, Katherine said. The territorial marshal has been notified. By the time they find anything, we'll be long gone. He gestured toward the door. Now, I came here wondering if Quinn might have left anything behind, something that belongs to me. Since he apparently hasn't, I'll be on my way. Katherine didn't move. If you harm him, you'll what? Blackwood's smile returned, colder than before. Chase after us, a woman alone against 4 armed men. He shook his head. Stay in your town, doctor, tend your patients, forget Abram Quinn ever existed. With that, he tipped his hat mockingly and stepped outside. Katherine waited until she heard hoofbeats fading before she collapsed onto a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. They had Abram. The thought hammered in her mind as she tried to think clearly. Blackwood wouldn't have left her alive if he intended to kill Abram. Immediately, he wouldn't risk her bringing the sheriff down on them before he'd extracted whatever vengeance he sought. That meant she had time, but not much. Katherine hurried back to town, avoiding the main roads. She found Sheriff Wilson at his office, relating her encounter with Blackwood in quick, precise terms. They've likely taken him to their camp, the sheriff reasoned. Can't risk killing him in town, too many witnesses. We need to find them, Katherine insisted. The sheriff scratched his beard. My deputy tracked them earlier today, said they came from the direction of Bear Creek Canyon. Good place to hide a camp, lots of small valleys and caves. Then that's where we start looking. Sheriff Wilson frowned. Now hold on, Doc, this isn't some medical emergency. These are armed outlaws we're talking about. I'm well aware, Katherine replied, and I'm also aware that every minute we delay decreases Abram's chances of survival. I can't spare more than 1 deputy, the sheriff said. Most of my men are escorting the payroll wagon from the mine. Then it will be you, your deputy, and me, Katherine stated flatly. The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. You're not coming along. Mr. Blackwood shot Abram once already. If when we find him, he'll need immediate medical attention. Her voice brooked no argument. I'm coming. An hour later, Katherine rode alongside Sheriff Wilson and Deputy Collins, a Winchester rifle across her saddle, a gift from a grateful patient last winter that she'd never expected to use. Her medical bag was securely packed, and beneath her riding skirt, the Derringer remained in her pocket. Bear Creek Canyon sprawled across the western edge of Delta's territory, a maze of smaller canyons and rocky outcroppings ideal for concealment. The sheriff led them along game trails, following subtle signs of recent passage: broken twigs, disturbed stones, a cigar butt discarded carelessly. They're not bothering to hide their trail, Deputy Collins observed nervously. Could be a trap. Or they don't expect pursuit so soon, the sheriff replied. Either way, we proceed with caution. As the afternoon sun began its descent behind the mountains, they found what they were seeking: a thin wisp of smoke rising from a sheltered hollow nestled between 2 rocky ridges. The sheriff signaled for silence, and they dismounted, securing their horses before continuing on foot. Katherine's heart pounded as they crept forward. The canyon walls provided cover as they approached, but the last 100 yards would leave them exposed if they attempted to rush the camp directly through a gap in the rocks. She could make out 4 horses tethered near a small fire. 2 men sat beside it, passing a bottle between them. Of Abram and Blackwood there was no sign. They've got to be in that cave, the sheriff whispered, pointing to a dark opening in the canyon wall behind the camp. Good defensive position, we'll need to draw them out. Katherine's medical instincts screamed at the delay. If Abram was injured, and she had little doubt that he was, every minute mattered. But she forced herself to think logically, to trust the sheriff's experience. Their plan was simple. Deputy Collins would circle around to approach from above, creating a distraction with controlled rock slides. Meanwhile, the sheriff would confront the men at the camp, giving Katherine a chance to reach the cave during the confusion. As the deputy disappeared around the ridge, Katherine checked her medical supplies one final time. The sheriff placed a hand on her shoulder. "If things go wrong, you ride for town," he said firmly. "No heroics." Katherine nodded, though they both knew she had no intention of leaving without Abram. The wait seemed interminable. Finally, the distinctive clatter of falling rocks echoed from the far side of the camp. The two men by the fire jumped to their feet, drawing weapons and scanning the ridgeline. A moment later, more rocks tumbled down, followed by a gunshot from the deputy's position. "Now," the sheriff muttered, stepping out from their hiding place with his rifle raised. "U.S. Marshal, drop your weapons." The lie served its purpose: momentary confusion as the men turned toward this new threat. Katherine didn't wait to see more. Keeping low, she skirted the edge of the clearing, making for the dark mouth of the cave. A shout went up as one of the men spotted her, but the sheriff's warning shot drew their attention back to him. Gunfire erupted behind her as Katherine ducked into the cave, momentarily blinded by the transition from sunlight to darkness. "Abram," she called softly, allowing her eyes to adjust. The cave extended deeper than she'd expected, the sound of dripping water echoing from somewhere in its depths. A groan answered her, sending her hurrying forward. As her vision cleared, she made out two figures, one slumped against the cave wall, the other standing above him with a revolver pointed at his head. "That's far enough, Doctor," Blackwood said, his silhouette outlined against the dim light filtering from deeper in the cave. "You're persistent, I'll grant you that." Katherine's eyes fixed on Abram. His face was barely recognizable beneath bruises and dried blood, but his eyes, those blue eyes she'd come to know so well, found hers, widening in alarm. "Katherine," he rasped, "get out of here." "Touching," Blackwood commented, the doomed outlaw concerned for his lady love. He kept the gun trained on Abram but addressed Katherine. "Your sheriff friend is outnumbered outside. Even if he survives, he won't reach you in time." Katherine raised her hands slowly, the medical bag still clutched in her left. "I'm not armed, I only came to help him," still trying to save him. Blackwood shook his head. "Some men aren't worth saving. Dr. Quinn knows that better than most." He pressed the barrel of his gun against Abram's temple. "Tell her, Quinn, tell her about the families we left homeless, the men who died because they crossed us. Tell her what you really are." Despite his injuries, Abram's voice was steady. "I've never pretended to be innocent." "But neither are you, Silas." Blackwood's laugh echoed in the confined space. "The difference is I don't pretend remorse. You always were soft-hearted. It's why I knew you'd betray us eventually." Katherine took a careful step forward. "He needs medical attention." "What he needs is a bullet to finish what I started," Blackwood replied, but his attention had shifted slightly, divided between his prisoner and this unexpected complication. The distraction was slight, but Abram seized it. Despite his battered condition, he lunged upward, grabbing Blackwood's wrist and forcing the gun away from his head. The weapon discharged, the bullet ricocheting off the cave wall as the two men grappled. Katherine didn't hesitate. She dropped her medical bag and pulled the derringer from her pocket, but couldn't get a clear shot as the men struggled. Abram, weakened by his injuries, was losing ground rapidly. Blackwood slammed him against the cave wall, his gun hand gradually overpowering Abram's grip. In desperation, Katherine rushed forward, slamming her small pistol against Blackwood's temple with all her strength. The outlaw staggered, momentarily stunned, his grip on his weapon loosening. Abram wrenched the gun away, gasping with pain at the effort. For a terrible moment, Katherine thought he might collapse, but determination kept him upright as he pointed the revolver at his former leader. "It's over, Silas," he panted. Blackwood straightened, touching the bleeding cut on his temple with an expression of mild surprise. "You won't kill me, Quinn. You don't have it in you anymore." His cold eyes flicked to Katherine. "Not in front of her. You're too concerned with what she thinks of you." "You're right," Abram admitted, his breathing labored. "I don't want to kill anyone ever again." The gun remained steady in his hand. "But I will if you force me to." Sounds of gunfire had ceased outside the cave, replaced by shouted commands that suggested the sheriff had gained the upper hand. Blackwood seemed to realize this, his expression hardening. "Kill me or let me go, Quinn. Those are your options. The law won't hold me for long, not out here." Katherine recovered her derringer, pointing it at Blackwood while retrieving a length of bandage from her medical bag. "Tie his hands," she told Abram. "The sheriff can sort him out." But as she approached with the bandage, Blackwood made his move. With the speed of a striking snake, he knocked the derringer from her hand and shoved her roughly aside, lunging for the cave entrance. Abram fired, the shot going wide as pain from his wound threw off his aim. "Stop." Katherine cried, but Blackwood was already at the mouth of the cave. He paused there, outlined against the fading daylight. "This isn't finished, Quinn," he called back. "Not while both of us draw breath." With that, he disappeared into the gathering dusk. A moment later, the sheriff appeared at the entrance, rifle raised. "Where is he?" "Gone," Abram said, slumping against the wall as the adrenaline drained from his system. "After him, quickly." The sheriff hesitated, taking in Abram's condition and Katherine already moving to his side with her medical bag. "Collins," he called to his deputy, "with me." They vanished in pursuit of the outlaw leader. Katherine turned her full attention to Abram, clinical assessment temporarily overriding her emotional relief at finding him alive. His injuries were severe but not immediately life-threatening: cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, multiple lacerations, and extensive bruising. Most concerning was the fresh blood seeping through his shirt near where the bullet remained lodged near his heart. "The wound's reopened," she said, cutting away his shirt to expose the damaged tissue. Abram grimaced as she probed gently. Blackwood was thorough. "Said he wanted me to feel every moment." Katherine's hands stilled briefly, rage building at the calculated cruelty before she forced herself back to the task at hand. "We need to get you back to town." "Katherine," he caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his injuries. "Thank you for coming after me. Did you think I wouldn't?" she asked softly. A ghost of his familiar smile touched his battered face. "I hoped you wouldn't. Too dangerous. Yet here we are." She continued treating his wounds, applying disinfectant and fresh bandages. "The bullets shifted position. I'll need proper equipment to assess the damage." By the time the sheriff returned, empty-handed and frustrated, Katherine had stabilized Abram enough for transport. Blackwood had disappeared into the wilderness, though they'd captured his 3 companions. "He won't get far on foot," the sheriff assured them as they helped Abram onto a horse. "I've sent word to neighboring settlements. Every lawman within 100 miles will be looking for him." The journey back to Delta was slow and painful. Katherine rode beside Abram, watching him carefully for signs of worsening condition. By the time they reached her clinic, night had fully descended, and Abram was barely conscious from the exertion. For the second time, Katherine found herself fighting to save his life through the long hours of darkness. The bullet had indeed shifted, tearing new tissue and causing internal bleeding. Without removing it entirely, still too dangerous, she could only repair the fresh damage and hope his body's remarkable resilience would prevail again. Dawn found her dozing in a chair beside his bed, her hand resting lightly on his wrist to monitor his pulse even in sleep. She woke to find him watching her, those blue eyes clearer than she dared hope. "Still here," he murmured. "Still stubborn," she countered with relief. Over the next several days, as Abram once again began the slow process of recovery, Delta buzzed with news of the confrontation at Bear Creek Canyon. The 3 captured outlaws were transported to Denver for trial, while the search for Silas Blackwood continued without success. Some believed he'd fled to Mexico, others that he'd died in the wilderness from exposure or animal attack. Either way, the immediate threat appeared to have passed. In her clinic, Katherine found herself facing a different kind of challenge. As Abram regained his strength, their relationship hovered in an undefined space between doctor and patient, friends and something more. Neither seemed willing to give voice to feelings that had grown impossible to ignore. 2 weeks after the rescue, Abram was strong enough to sit on the clinic's small porch in the evening, watching the sunset paint Delta's modest buildings in gold and crimson. Katherine joined him, bringing coffee and the news that Sheriff Wilson had received word from the territorial marshal. "The gang's been officially disbanded," she said, taking the chair beside him. "With Blackwood gone and the others in custody, the territory is considering the matter closed." Abram nodded, his profile thoughtful in the fading light. "And what about me?" "I wasn't exactly an innocent bystander in their activities. The marshal is aware of your role in warning the authorities about the train robbery. It seems you've earned yourself a fresh start." She hesitated. "You're free to leave Delta whenever you choose." He turned to look at her, searching her face. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" Katherine set her coffee cup aside, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his gaze. "What I want is for you to be safe and well. Beyond that, it's not my place to dictate your future." "Katherine." The way he said her name, soft, almost reverent, made her look up. "Ask me to stay," her heart hammered against her ribs. "I can't ask that of you." "Why not?" "Because you deserve to make your own choices without obligation. Because Delta may never feel safe to you after everything that's happened. Because," she stopped, finding her professional detachment crumbling. "Because you're afraid I'll leave anyway," he finished gently. She nodded, unable to deny it. Too many people had left her father to drink after her mother died, her brother to the war, her fiancé to illness. She'd built her life in Delta on self-sufficiency, never allowing herself to need anyone too deeply. Abram reached for her hand, his touch warm and certain. "The bullet near my heart, the one you said, would be my constant companion. It reminds me every day of how close I came to dying. But it also reminds me of you, of the woman who looked at a bleeding outlaw and saw someone worth saving." Katherine's fingers tightened around his. "I saw you, Abram. Not what you'd done or where you'd been, just you." "Then see this too," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I love you, Katherine. I think I've loved you since you stood over me and said you'd decide whether I was worth saving." His smile was tender, vulnerable. "I'm asking permission to stay not just in Delta, but with you, if you'll have me." The tears Katherine had held back for weeks through fear and relief and uncertainty finally spilled over. "Yes," she whispered, the word catching in her throat. "Stay." He drew her closer, his free hand coming up to brush away her tears. Their first kiss was gentle, mindful of his healing wounds, but held the promise of passion carefully banked for now. When they parted, Katherine rested her forehead against his, unwilling to move away. "I love you," she said, the words feeling simultaneously momentous and like the simplest truth she'd ever spoken. "And I'm very glad I didn't listen when you told me not to waste medicine on you." Abram's laughter rumbled through his chest, and he winced slightly at the pull on his healing ribs. "I'll never question your medical judgment again." "A wise policy," she agreed with a smile. As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, speaking of possibilities that had seemed unimaginable weeks before. Abram talked of using his savings legitimately earned from the cattle drive to buy land outside town. Katherine shared her dreams of expanding her medical practice, perhaps training others. "We'll build something good," Abram promised. "Something honest," Katherine believed him. The road ahead would not be easy. Abram's past would always cast shadows, and her position as a female doctor would continue to present challenges. But together, they had already overcome greater obstacles. The following spring found Delta transformed. The winter had been harsh but productive for the small frontier town. New buildings had risen along Main Street, the mine was producing record yields, and the town council, including its newest member, Abram Quinn, was discussing the possibility of a proper schoolhouse. Katherine's clinic had expanded into the adjacent building, allowing her to treat more patients and even perform small surgeries. Her reputation had spread beyond Delta, bringing patients from neighboring settlements who valued her skills above conventional prejudices about female physicians. The small house Abram had built for them stood on a rise just outside town, close enough for Katherine to reach her clinic quickly when needed, but far enough to offer privacy and peace. A vegetable garden flourished behind it, and a barn housed their horses alongside a milk cow and chickens. It wasn't grand, but to both of them, it represented something precious, a home freely chosen, built together. On a warm evening in May, Katherine returned from delivering a neighbor's baby to find Abram on their porch, writing in a leather-bound journal. He looked up as she approached, his face relaxed and happy in a way she never tired of seeing. "Successful delivery?" he asked, making room for her on the bench. "Very twin boys, both healthy." She settled beside him, leaning against his shoulder. "Mrs. Peterson named the second one Abram, after the man who rode through a snowstorm this winter to bring her husband home when she went into early labor." Abram looked embarrassed but pleased. "She didn't need to do that. People appreciate kindness," Katherine replied. "You've earned their respect, you know. The town council position proves that." He set aside his journal to wrap an arm around her. "I have you to thank for that, for believing I could be more than my past." "You did the work," she said firmly. "I just provided encouragement. And occasional medical attention when you overexerted yourself building this house." Abram laughed. "Speaking of medical attention," his expression grew more serious. "Any pain today?" Katherine placed a hand over her slightly rounded belly, where their first child had recently begun to make its presence known. "None at all. Your son or daughter is being very cooperative." "Good." He covered her hand with his. "I've been thinking about names." "Have you now?" she smiled. "And what have you decided? If it's a boy, perhaps Thomas after your father." He paused. "And if it's a girl, Elizabeth after my mother." Katherine felt a rush of tenderness. Abram rarely spoke of his family, the wounds still tender even after so many years. That he would honor his mother this way spoke volumes about his healing heart. "They're perfect," she said softly. As the sun dipped below the western mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Abram pulled her closer. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," he confessed. "That we're here together, that despite everything we found this." Katherine understood completely. Their path had been unlikely, dangerous, fraught with obstacles both external and self-imposed. Yet here they sat, planning for a child, building a future neither had dared imagine before Delta brought them together. "It's real," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it where their baby had just delivered a decisive kick. "Very real." Abram's face lit with wonder at the movement beneath his palm. After a moment, he reached for something in his pocket, a small velvet pouch he placed in her hand. "What's this?" she asked, untying the drawstring. "Something I've been saving for." Inside the pouch, she found a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. When opened, it contained a tiny daguerreotype of the two of them, taken in Denver on their wedding day 6 months earlier. "Abram, it's beautiful," she breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "Not as beautiful as you," he replied. "Dr. Katherine Quinn." She touched the locket where it rested above her heart. "Right about here," she mused, "is where your bullet sits. Imagine that, both of us carrying something precious near our hearts." He laughed softly. "I prefer your keepsake to mine." "Your bullet brought you to me," she reminded him. "I'd say that makes it precious too, in its way." As evening deepened into night, they remained on the porch, speaking of the future, their child's education. Katherine's plans to write a medical text based on her frontier experiences. Abram's growing involvement in the community. Occasionally, they lapsed into comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. Later, as they prepared for bed, Abram pulled Katherine into his arms, his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know something," he said. "No matter what happens, no matter what challenges come, and they will come, I will never regret staying here with you. Not for a single moment." Katherine reached up to trace the scar on his chest where the bullet remained. "And I will never regret deciding you were worth the medicine," she replied with a smile. "Worth everything, in fact." In the years that followed, Delta would grow from a small frontier settlement into a proper town with a railroad station and telegraph office. The Quinn family would grow as well, first with the birth of their son Thomas, then 3 years later with twins, Elizabeth and William. Katherine's medical practice would become renowned throughout Colorado territory, while Abram's fair-minded leadership would help guide Delta through the transition to statehood. The bullet remained near Abram's heart, a permanent reminder of how their story began. Sometimes, on cold winter nights, it pained him enough that Katherine would prepare a special liniment to ease his discomfort. But more often, They would joke that the real pain in his chest came from loving her too much, a condition for which she assured him with a kiss she had no intention of finding a cure.